So next, I'd like to introduce Jim Schneider with Olsson. Jim performs hydrologic investigations and groundwater modeling for public and private clients. He focuses on integrated and sustainable ways to manage surface and groundwater. Prior to joining Olsson, Jim worked at the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, where he served as the deputy director for 5 years. While at NDNR, Jim administered state water policies and reviewed permit applications, providing insight into water rights issues in the U.S. and globally. Jim has also been one of the key developers of GET or GET, proprietary software platform designed to allow users to easily ask questions and get the answers they need to make sound decisions. And the work with Olsson has been really helpful for us in thinking about how we integrate data into water use accounting platforms and link it with groundwater models in particular. So, Jim? Yeah.
Thank you. Are any other groundwater modelers in the audience? Okay, a few of us. Well, just curious about that. I'm getting into the nitty gritty of some of the modeling that we have to do in Nebraska for some of the water management programs. One thing I wanted to start out with is, if you don't know about Nebraska, there's kind of at least two unique things about the state of Nebraska. One is that the state in the early 80s delegated groundwater management to local natural resource districts. So the state's divided up into 23 NRDs, and they're responsible for managing groundwater. The state manages surface water. For a little while, they tried to pretend like there was no connection between the two, and then early in 2004, those systems came together. And now the local NRDs and the state develop what are called integrated management plans to develop the joint system. And then the other thing about Nebraska that'll become relevant in a few minutes is Nebraska is the only public power state in the country. So 100% public power in Nebraska. And so that actually fed well into this Twin Plat water data program that I'm going to tell you about today. So there you can see the map of the 23 NRDs in Nebraska and the Twin Plat NRD there with kind of a coarse depiction of the irrigated parcels across the NRD, about 2,400 irrigated parcels, little less than 300,000 irrigated acres. And the management goals here are a little different. The way, due to some issues with endangered species downstream of here and other conflicts between surface and groundwater users that came to a head over the last 15 or 20 years. They kind of, there's a line in the sand that's been drawn regarding the impact of groundwater use on surface water flow. And that line in the sand is the depletions to surface water flow from groundwater pumping cannot be greater than they would be under the 1997 level of development. And that might sound simple, just look at the number of acres that are irrigated in any given year, but it's more than that. It's the number of irrigated acres, but it's also the types of crops that are grown and the consumptive use of those crops. And of course, I know just enough about this to be dangerous, but I know that things like tillage practices changing, genetically modified seed creates changes in consumptive use, typically for the better in both cases. And so we've been struggling to kind of account for all of those things over the past 25 years or so. And this is a rough schematic of how we've, okay, so let me back up. So what we have to do in order to figure out if we're meeting that goal of not exceeding the impact of the 97 level of development is we have to develop and update groundwater models regularly. So we just finished the update to the groundwater model for this area up through 2020. We're doing another update that's just finishing up this year through 2020, and then we'll be going forward from there. So I don't want you to try to understand this or even read all of this, but the point is it's a pretty complicated process of taking weather data from weather stations that exist nearby and basically figuring out what the pumping would be for a given year at a weather station for a number of different crops that might be grown, and then interpolating that out to all of the actual parcels based on our best guess of crop type and other land use parameters, which has improved. And this program that the Twin Plat launched, this water data program, is a significant step forward in our ability to update those groundwater models with much more actual data and much more real-time data. So the water data program is actually a partnership between the regulator, being the NRD, and the growers in the NRD. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we rely on IoT devices to provide estimates of pumping. And when they're all working, we're getting an estimate of how much water was pumped by every well in the NRD every day. And I'll talk a little bit more about the challenges of that. Most of the wells in the NRD are powered by electricity. And so we have entered into partnerships with the public power districts who are eager to help because the irrigators are their number one client and they don't want them to go away. So which regulations could cause. So we use the electric smart meters that are deployed, and where we don't have an electric well powered by natural gas or something else, we use a different IoT device that communicates through a LoRaWAN network. And it's basically just a continuity device that gets hooked up to the pressure sensor on the pivot. And from both of these sources, you can readily tell when the well is pumping and when it's not. And we combine that with accurate, up-to-date flow rate measurements from each well. And as this project was getting going, of course, this was in 2019. This is when I was first starting to hear about OpenET. And so we're incorporating that data. It all gets pulled into a dashboard that Environmental Science Associates, and Ray's here from ESA, has helped us build. And but the first step was engaging with the growers. So if in Nebraska, there's a lot of absentee landowners, and so the NRD can and does know very well who owns the land because they're funded by property taxes, and so they can go to the county and get that information. But most of the time, the person who owns the land isn't the grower that actually farms the land, and they found that out all too well early on when they were trying to get the grower to give us permission to access their electrical information. They had to get a form signed that was agreed upon by the public power district in that area, so that they felt comfortable sharing that data. And this is a little dated, but basically they bribed the growers with lots of food and the like. They kind of stepped up their game as they were getting harder to attract people. I think it just started out with cookies, and eventually they were serving up brisket. But one of the really key things about this is it's 100% voluntary. So they found the roughly 500 and change growers in the district, and they all voluntarily signed up for this program, which is, I think, amazing. Nobody really expected that, but the hard work of the staff at the NRD is what made that happen. And what they get in exchange is they get an account in a platform called AgHub, which was developed by a data cooperative called GISC. And when they log into this platform, they can see their recent water use. You can see down in the bottom right, that's the previous 10 days. You have a cumulative, a monthly and annual cumulative graph. And also in the top left corner is a place where the growers can enter their crop type and their tillage type. And that's the one thing they're actually required to do. They don't have to do it in here, but they are required by rule to report crop type and tillage type for every field that they farm on. So if you haven't seen one, this is the electric smart meter. These were deployed by the public power districts to make load control easier for them to implement. during the hot summer, when everyone goes home from work and flips on their or turns on their air conditioner, turns on their TV, all that stuff. They have load issues, and farmers sign up to voluntarily let the power company shut their power off 1 or more days a week, just kind of not really at random, but when needed, within limits. So because these were deployed, and in large part back to 2016, we could get this data. It comes in 15-minute increments, and it's abundantly obvious for each one of those increments whether or not a well is running or not. There might be a few other things hooked up to that power meter, but the well is using by far the most power. And this just shows a few of those LoRaWAN devices as well. And then, of course, we are partnering with OpenET, and we have pulled in data from back to 2010 and pulling it in monthly into the water manager's dashboard. I'll show you here next. So, as I said, ESA has helped us develop this platform. This is a separate platform, not for the grower, but for the manager. This platform is connected to the AgHub platform via API, and they exchange data every night. Show a few things that the managers can do in here. I mentioned when the devices work, especially the LoRaWAN devices that run off of D-cell batteries and have to put up with some of our extreme weather in Nebraska, like when it gets to be 20 below. So they need to know when they need to visit these devices, and this is the yellow and red are indicating the locations where we haven't heard from a device in a while. And here is the data for a given field. In some cases, we have flow meters paired with a well where we're getting the electrical data as well, and you can kind of see that there's the two data sources there if you squint, and they match up well. I should have said this when I started, but this program was born out of a kind of a demand from the stakeholders that the NRD collect more data, but they didn't want water meters. So we had to figure out, and part of the reason is cost. We heard about the prohibitive cost of water meters. So it was really not just the growers. The NRD didn't want to manage a water meter program on 2,400 wells in their NRD. But we do have some out there to help verify the other data. And then I know this is a little hard to see, but here we've got for every field, 2,400 fields, precipitation data from GridMet, ET data, and this is for every month of each year, and then we've got the different sources of pumping data, so all in one place. And hot off the presses, we just added a viewer so we can see the crop and tillage types. And I like to joke that Nebraska's perfected the corn crop rotation. And it's largely true, but not 100%. And you can see here, it's obviously the dominant crop, but I was actually kind of surprised at some of the things that are grown in, it's not de minimis by any means, several thousand acres of sugar beets, potatoes, small grains, so there's some farmers that like to experiment with different crops, and in a lot of cases it's because they're trying to limit their consumptive use, to be better stewards of the land. And this is interesting. I know the colors are a little hard to distinguish, but the key point is when you look at conventional till, where that was kind of probably the dominant tillage practice, maybe back in the 90s, it's almost gone. And that has a really big effect on consumptive use as well. And so we've in the past used windshield surveys for both helping to identify crop as well as tillage type. It takes a lot of time a lot of effort, costs a lot of money. Now the growers just go in here and report it, and we have it. So this is kind of a summary of some of the data starting in 2016, and you can see total water application on average is anywhere from 30 to 40 inches, but and indicating, and you can see some of the wetter years and drier years, but of course annual totals don't tell the whole story. An awful lot depends on timing of precipitation. Just go through these real quick, but what I thought was really interesting about this, showing a histogram of the annual pumping for each year, you can see the wet and the dry years, but just the huge variation. So there's a lot of producer practice variability going on in here. There's got to be. We haven't figured it all out, but to see this much variation in one pretty small geographic region was kind of surprising to me. Let me go back. If you can see, we're going to single in on one field. That's right there. This is all, we keep all this data secure, obviously, but yeah, just to drill into one field, just to see the water budget at this one field. I just kind of picked it out by randomly and was pleasantly surprised to see what that looked like. So corn grown at this field, they're down to strip till, which is not quite no-till, but pretty close. Very flat, sandy soils. So here we can look at both the precipitation, monthly precipitation that fell on this field, as well as the pumping depth that was added to that. And you can see a couple of interesting features. Like in 2016, 18, 19, they had a really wet spring, and that delayed irrigation. But also, to some extent, those were kind of the events that produced a little bit of a surplus of water, and you'll see that in the next slide. But yeah, it's really interesting to drill in and see exactly how water was applied to this field over a series of years, and then looking at comparing that total applied water to the monthly ET. And again, you can see those early wet months of probably March and April are when there's not much ET going on. But you can see it looks like they match pretty darn well. It's obviously independent data. And then we look at the cumulative plot, and I just thought, I got goosebumps when I saw this. This is incredible. And this is obviously one heck of an irrigator. He knows what he's doing. Most of the water that lands on this field gets used to grow corn, as you can see. So out of about 250 inches on the right, or on the left side there, of cumulative applied water, only about 10 inches of that was not evapotranspired at the field. And so I'm quite certain we're not going to find this in every field. But the real question is, what do you do about that difference? It's obviously either runoff or deep percolation. What is it? And so, kind of coming around full circle, we still are going to need to do some modeling to figure out what's going on in the soil profile. And so this is what we're just starting work on right now. And you can see, whereas the first slide had a lot of, didn't have nearly as much real data as inputs. Here we've got daily precipitation, daily irrigation, crop type, tillage type. We always had soil type. We always did the effective precipitation using the SCS curve number method, but we'll do that ahead of the soil water balance modeling. From that, we'll be able to compute the deep percolation and produce that computation of ET. And then where I think this is going to get really interesting, the first two parts there are pretty, that's where we take the deep perk and the irrigation and apply it in the models for the well, in the recharge and well files for the groundwater model. but this validation that I'm calling it here, when we look at what does OpenET say the ET was, and what are we computing the ET based on all of the new data that we're collecting. I think that's going to be really fascinating, and I'm looking forward to sharing in the future. So what's next? We'll continue collecting real-time data, and the manager of the Twin Plat NRD likes to say this is a forever program. So this wasn't a pilot. This isn't a term program. It's funded by their taxpayer, their local property taxes. They're funded, and they plan to continue this program, and we'll continue to build on it essentially forever. We need to continue drilling down into the data. I mean, I don't know when in my career things switched over from not having enough data to having too much data, but we're definitely way on the other spectrum of that right now. Yeah, the goal is to automate all of this within the dashboard, so that it's doing all these analytics with the data, and every time we get through a year, it'll spit out these files that we can then update the groundwater model with, and have a new estimate of where they're at relative to that 1997 level of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We'll take one question ahead for lunch, and while folks are thinking of a question, I'll just say, like, the comparisons that we're able to do through this type of system against the meter data are really important. The first thing you showed, super encouraging. We're seeing similar things in the Salinas Valley, but often those types of comparisons, I think, are more compelling and convincing to our agricultural partners than eddy covariance, which is trying to explain eddy covariance in 5 minutes. If anyone learns how to do it, please tell me. Yeah, one quick question, and then we'll head for lunch. Thank you again, Jim.
I was fascinated by the level of grower participation, as you mentioned. And maybe the appropriate question is where you get brisket. But beyond that, presumably it has to do with their pumping costs and the electrical costs. I know it can be so high, and it's certainly an issue with growers in California. And so I wonder if you could just elaborate a little more on their incentives, and maybe it's around the smart electrical metering that they're really curious about. How it seems they're maybe using your platform to kind of optimize their production around reducing electrical costs, but I don't know.
No, certainly the cost is one thing, although unfortunately in Nebraska, if you're a farmer and you're not sure if you should put an extra inch on, you're going to do it. The cost isn't so much that you really think that much about it. But I think moreover, it's when I talked about the management plans that they've developed, there's triggers in there that if they don't kind of on their own get to that 97 level of development, there will be allocations and meters and all that stuff. So when that was explained to people, they were on board, and they really want to show what they think is the truth, that they're using less water than was previously thought. And I've heard an anecdotal story about someone who was lying in bed at night and it started raining, and his pivot was running. I normally probably would have just gone back to sleep, but he knew that we knew that he didn't turn his pivot off or would know. and it got him to get out of bed and go turn it off. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. And thank you. Let's have another round of applause for all of our presenters. So we should have lunch now, and I know some folks have to run, so if you do, thank you again so much for coming. I think Maurice may have a few closing remarks after folks grab lunch, and we can convene in the ballroom. And yeah, thank you again. Outstanding presentations, so thank you.